The White House played defense again today after new information surfaced on Monday night that the administration's handling of Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer during the 2016 campaign. The latest story suggests that the president personally intervened. Lisa Desjardins begins our coverage.
The president weighed in as any father would based on the limited information that he had.
What did the president know and say about his son's meeting with a Russian lawyer? The Washington Post reports that President Trump was more involved than the White House and his attorney originally let on. This starts with the Trump Tower meeting last summer that included Donald Trump Jr., Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, and Russian attorney Natalia Veselnitskaya. Flash forward a year. Kushner and his wife Ivanka Trump at the G20 summit learned the New York Times is about to report the story. They huddled to craft a response. According to the Post, they wanted to be truthful so their account couldn't be repudiated later. But the Post reports that on Air Force One flying back to the U.S., the president overruled his advisors. The Post writes that the president directed that Trump Jr.'s statement to the Times described the meeting as unimportant and unrelated to the campaign. That quickly was contradicted by Trump Jr.'s own emails showing he'd been promised damaging campaign material on Hillary Clinton. The Post story of the president's role in his son's statement conflicts with what his lawyer said last month.
I do want to be clear that the president was not involved in the drafting of the statement and did not issue the statement. It came from Donald Trump Jr.
White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders said today that the president did not dictate anything but did weigh in, and she maintained he never misled.
The statement that was issued was true and there were no inaccuracies in the statement. I think what the bigger question is, everybody wants to try to make this some story about misleading. The only thing I see misleading is a year's worth of stories that have been fueling a false narrative about this Russia collusion.
What is true or false remains a question for investigators. At least one Senate committee plans to interview Donald Trump Jr. next month. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
And now to walk us through some of the legal questions raised by the Washington Post report, we're joined by Peter Zeidenberg. He was a federal prosecutor for nearly 2 decades and was a deputy special counsel involved in the investigation into the leak of CIA officer Valerie Plame's identity. Peter Zeidenberg, welcome to the NewsHour. So now that the White House has confirmed that the president was involved weighed in, as the press secretary said in this statement by Donald Trump Jr. to the public, what effect does this have on this investigation?
Well, it's going to generate a lot of interest, I'm sure, from the special counsel, who's going to want to know who was involved in that whole process. Everyone on that plane who was weighing in, whether they were actually physically on the plane or according to the Post story, they were emailing or calling in. So all those people are going to want to, the special counsel is going to want to interview and find out what was going on.
How much does it matter, Peter Zeidenberg, that the White House press secretary said today, yes, the president weighed in as a father would, but then just a few weeks ago, the president's attorney said, no, the president didn't have any involvement in this? Well,
you know, lying to the public is not a crime. But what is going to be of interest is the motivation behind this. You know, the administration keeps saying that this meeting was inconsequential, it's a nothing burger, who cares? But the account of it, they don't want to tell, at least from a prosecutor standpoint. The question would be, well, why are they trying to divert attention to what was really happening, or why are they misleading about what was really going on with this? I mean, the whole thing highlights the problem with having, from a lawyer's perspective, having subjects conversing about an investigation while it's ongoing.
Does the fact that we now know that the president himself appears to have been part of this conversation, part of the decision about what to say, and that the version changed over the next few days, does that have a material effect here?
Well, it could, because by all accounts, this is a potential obstruction of justice investigation involving the president, involving, for instance, the firing of James Comey. And so if this incident in and of itself is not illegal, it's not illegal to lie to the press or to lie to the public, but you're looking for motivation if you're a prosecutor, and you're looking for trying to weave together a narrative of facts. And it's suggestive that there is a cover-up going on about a fear of what would happen if the public were to find out about this case. And that's how the firing of James Comey would fit into that.
So a narrative. So if someone's asking, was there a legal line that was crossed, what's the answer to that?
Well, it's not so much that there's a legal line crossed. It's just another piece of evidence, another piece of the puzzle from a prosecutor's standpoint.
So if you are Robert Mueller and you're working on this, what are your questions? What other questions are you going to have right now?
Well, you're going to want to know how this story evolved and what the perspectives of all the different people were. There's a whole question that, you know, because of all these people and the way they had this conversation, it's probably not a privileged conversation, as opposed to if they were just speaking with their own counsel. So again, it paints a picture which is really, it may not be true, but from a prosecutor's standpoint, whenever you have subjects of an investigation sitting down together, literally, and coming up with a story, what it looks like is obstruction of justice. And that's why attorneys always tell their clients who are under investigation, don't talk about the case with anyone involved. Don't talk about it.
So if we hear a lot about how presidents are immune from laws that other people are subject to. How do we know at this point whether the president himself could be in any legal jeopardy?
Well, we don't know, but from what we've heard, it certainly appears that there's an ongoing case of obstruction of justice, again involving Comey, if not other things. So it's on the whole scenario, as it's described in the Post story, unnecessarily put a whole bunch of people at legal risk for no good reason. And whether it's, the impression is certainly problematic at best.
Peter Zeidenberg, the story continues to unfold. Thank you very much.
Thank you.